Welcome everybody to the second episode of our Enabling E-commerce podcast series. In the first episode, we discussed the e-commerce sector in the UAE and the MENA based on our recent e-commerce report we launched together with Euromonitor International. And this week, I would like to welcome Alexandros Komianos, Chief Fulfilment and Logistics Officer at Chalhoub Group, where we will be discussing a very exciting topic in the e-commerce, omni-channel opportunities in the sector. Alex, welcome.
Hello, Mohsen. Thank you very much for having me.
Alex, it's a pleasure to have you as our guest today to address a very important fact of e-commerce, omni-channel. We talked a lot about it, but before we delve into a more detailed discussion, I'm sure our audience want to hear about your experience at Chalhoub Group and what are some of the key observations you would like to share about the current e-commerce landscape.
Excellent. Once more, thank you very much for having me in the podcast. Is great to be part of this series. Also, very proud to be part of the Chalhoub Group, and even prouder to be trusted with leading the fulfillment and logistics function across the region. I must admit that I had the chance to work for a lot of companies in the past, but the group is truly a great company to work for, with a unique culture, deeply rooted in the values of the Chalhoub family. So, this is a great starting point whenever you want to give the best to your consumers. Now, back to our topic, I think around the state of e-commerce, this is also always a very interesting one as it evolves really, really fast. And especially if we look at our region, I think what we have is the local specificity. It's much more prevalent than, let's say, in other parts of the world, especially in Europe and the US. And what do we really mean? What holds true for a Saudi consumer probably does not apply for an Emirati consumer or for someone else. So we need to be really locally relevant if we want to win in the marketplace. Now, if we look at the evolution of e-commerce, at least, during COVID, it was quite important. COVID was a very big, wake-up call to a lot of companies within the region. But I think there's two key observations. If we look at the UAE, I believe that the consumer has matured significantly, especially during the COVID period. If we look at Dubai, more or less, because a lot of people, always also being expats and bringing experiences from US and Europe, they actually raised the bars on how you need to do e-commerce. But then if we look at other countries like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, I think the adoption of online has increased dramatically. But this has brought, some other challenges around how you are reliable and how can you deliver to promise. But yeah, it's a great region to be in around e-commerce because it's still evolving and it's not close to the maturity we see in the Western world, at least.
Fantastic. I think that's one of the things we did discuss in the previous podcast of how this region is evolving and how we've seen the sort of the growth in this region and as especially post-pandemic. Let me. I think what you did was rightly mentioned. You mentioned the pandemic. I want to sort of dig deeper into the omni-channel bit, sort of post-pandemic. Do you think the way business see omni-channel has changed, and that is not just like a word, a buzzword for survival? And what is the definition of omni-channel for our listeners, and how it has evolved over time?
Great. Excellent. No, straight into what matters most. I think, again, I will focus quite a lot in our region because, this is where we operate and this is where the consumers that we need to cater for. The businesses and the groups within the region have really started to understand the criticality of omni-channel. I think a broadly accepted definition of omni-channel is almost like the unification of the retail experience across the different touch points, allowing consumers to transition seamlessly between physical and online stores without actually breaking their consumer journey, their experience. If we look a little bit at the initial stages of introducing omnichannel, I think it was perceived a little bit like we need to have online presence. So people were having physical stores, quite a few of them, and they were operating from these stores and the malls, etc. But then, especially as COVID came in, the companies really understood. They were like, oh, okay, we need to become more omni-channel. What do we miss? We miss an online presence. But actually, they started from that. But if we look at the beginning, it was quite disconnected, right? The inventory was split, dedicated inventory for the stores, dedicated inventory for the e-commerce. There was a lot of internal politics around who gets the revenue. A typical question you even get today is, if I ship from store an online purchase, who actually gets the revenue, the store or the online business? Right? So I think, this was showcasing some of the challenges of operating omni-channel was very much internally focused. And I believe the major shift actually started to come when, instead of companies defining their omni-channel capabilities looking internally, they focused at the consumer. And they said, wait a second, does it really matter where I accrue the revenue if I make it? Does it matter if it is e-commerce or if it is stores? What I really want to do is delight the consumer. So actually the question shifted from, not how many stores do I need to, or how many online websites, but actually, how does our consumer want to shop? What do we need to offer them in order to be able to be delighted and increase our conversion and our retention, right? Because we need to remember that acquiring a consumer, it's much more expensive than actually retaining them if we do the right things.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting way of putting it. When you talked about your definition, if you allow me to use it, your unification of consumer experience. I think that's the rightly word of omni-channel. But I mean, some of the points you mentioned related to who gets the revenue and all this, it always brings the sort of the if you try to set up the strategy, I mean, it brings a challenge. So this goes to my next question. Today's businesses, how do they create and add value, and what are the sort of some of the challenges to make sure that becomes sort of a seamless experience for the
yeah,
consumers?
exactly. No, very much into the same topic, and I believe every single strategy needs to start with understanding the consumer. As much as we want to design and implement any solution we see fit as professionals, in order to be able to add value, we do need to understand. So I believe consumer centricity is actually key. And deciding that this will be the focal point for any decision we will take, for any design we want to do around the strategy, it will give a different perception. Because what I have experienced in the past, but also what we're trying to do a lot within the group at the moment, is focusing on the consumer. You actually take away a lot of the emotion of the different stakeholders and the politics. So looking at creating a strategy that creates a strong bond with the consumers by focusing on what they want. How do they want to shop? What do they need? What is important for them when they make a purchase? This creates a common, let's say, point or direction for all the stakeholders. So then you can go forward and design the different facets or the different elements of your capabilities and your future strategy.
Yeah, but just so that our audience get the experience, or the viewers, I mean, you've been in the group, Chalhoub. I think you also worked previously with them on and off different. Just so that people get if you can share some of an experience that you had of how this things turned around using omni-channel approach.
Yes, of course. And I will start with first of all, how we've tried to, let's say, approached the COVID period, which was quite interesting for the group, because the group originally and historically was very much heavy on the physical store things, right? We were very good in our stores, a huge, store network. But we have a very broad portfolio on brands. And I think the first thing we've tried to do was to create the right technological and logistical infrastructure to support e-commerce operations. So, we've evolved from distribution to retail, which was mainly store fulfillment. And at a very quick turnaround, we've actually created the right infrastructure to be able and serve the different countries as fast as possible from an e-commerce perspective. And I think this was the beginning of our omni-channel journey. Now, if I go, let's say, in a specific experience, I will get the one at Level Shoes. Level Shoes is probably one of our diamonds, let's say, in the group. We have our flagship store in Dubai Mall. But what at this moment is, let's say, excellent is the following. You can walk into the Dubai Mall store and you might find a pair of shoes that you want to buy. And you might not want to carry it with you. We can deliver it to your house within 90 minutes. Wow. And you don't need to pay anything. You don't need to do anything. You just need to ask us and we will do it. So from an omni-channel perspective, and I think from this seamless experience, what we can offer to our consumer is you can come into the store, you can actually experience the personal service, you can try, and then we can give you the easiness of not actually carrying your shoes. We can deliver them to your house within a 90-minute period from whenever you're going to call us, which I believe it's quite important. And even if we see the e-commerce experience, if the next time you know what you want to buy, you just go into our app, you buy your shoes, 90 minutes, we're at your door. Right, and I think this is a great experience that we offer in Dubai specifically, and also we do same-day delivery for the whole of UAE, which for me it's again quite important to serve consumers.
Yeah, I think to be able to achieve a sort of a 90-minute, that requires a lot of coordination and sort of collaboration between different parties. I had my question about sort of trying to ask you about how's the seamless experience, but I think when you tell me 90 minutes from a store to deliver to a home in Dubai, I think that seamless experience is very much there. But I think, I mean, you talked about Level Shoes and the type of clients you have, sort of, I think within the Chalhoub Group, you carry some of the sort of one of the sort of the high-end and brand. What do you think about the personalization of data, for the client, and how can data be effective used to create a sort of a personalized experience? You said about the second time if they come in, if they want, but how do you guys personalize this per person?
I think personalization is a very interesting topic, and probably one of the things that we need to ensure that we keep separate is product personalization and experience personalization, right? Because, when we talk about product, this has to do a lot with the actual design of the product and what can we do for it, and probably mostly linked with engraving or some other small additions that you can do as a postponement within the store. But then when we talk about experience personalization, then this is fully controllable by any company. But it's a very interesting challenge because we actually need to create infrastructure and capabilities in anticipation of the consumer needs. Of course, data actually play a very, very critical role because they allow us to understand the traits of our consumers. And I must admit, I don't want to use the word segmentation because I think using the word segmentation takes away the pure sense of personalization. And overall, the way that we look at it within the group is a personalized experience. It's about the consumer being able to be at the driver's seat when they want to shop with us. And then when data is coming in, is about studying how consumers selected the services we've offered them in the past But what is very important is try to understand what we don't have and consumers might want. I think a very big mistake a lot of companies do is they look at the past and they try to build the future.
Yeah.
But the past you can only see the performance of what you've already done.
Yeah.
And this is where data is very important, but then you need to create data that you probably don't have readily available through surveys, through focus groups, to really understand what can you innovate and what might resonate. And then from a data point of view, it's also the experimentation. You can experiment and gather data in order to be able then to create a sustainable service that you then offer to everyone. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting point that we will use a lot in the future. It will be a big point.
Yeah, let me shift a little bit to a topic that I think a lot of people have is what maybe the word uses is social shopping. We've seen a lot of that. We've seen a lot of them. They're making leap into sort of the global market, particularly when people are facing on Facebook or Instagram, WhatsApp, WeChat, and sort of what's your personal take on this? I mean, on this social shopping?
It will grow more. It will grow more, and every year, every month, it will grow more. And actually, as the generation, the younger generations become a bit older and they shop more, it will grow even more. And I do believe that social commerce is actually part of a personalized experience, right? Because it actually makes the buying experience even more seamless and even more frictionless. Like the ability to buy something directly from Instagram or Facebook, it reduces the steps in order to buy a product. Because in the past, you could go into Facebook, you would click something, it would get you into a website. In the website, you would have to log in. It was a longer process. But now I think e-commerce and social commerce, it's going to grow even more. But I think what is very important is how we and companies and retailers like us, how do we ensure that social commerce is now part of our daily ecosystem, of our infrastructure, and we include it and we link it in the right way, and we have the right level of product availability. So I think the technicalities and the technology to support social commerce is going to be quite interesting and a challenge for a lot of companies in the future, because it will grow, it will stay. I think that's what we all see.
Yeah, I think these days, most of the time you see them. It's a very great tool to capture more consumers to come in. They're right there with few clicks. You get the product that you want right there. I think, just so that our audience get a more of an action plan, I wanted to talk more about the opportunity aspect, for our audience. Sort of, how important is internal alignment and having a clear strategy? How can a business foray into this without taking a sort of a haphazard approach, which would be more detrimental than beneficial to the business?
That's another great question, and thank you for that. And please allow me to quote a Greek philosopher, Socrates.
It's got to be the Greek.
Yeah, exactly. He actually said, know thyself, right? And in business terms, is actually understand your baseline, understand your maturity. I had the chance to work in the consulting industry for a number of years, and there's no coincidence that in almost every single engagement, you always start with a baseline analysis, with an as-is analysis, right? And this is where I believe a lot of companies are, in hindsight, trying to run before they learn to walk.
Yeah.
So appreciation of knowing where you are, what your current capabilities can allow you to do, and appreciate the journey ahead is the first step before, let's say, designing any strategy. Because the most important thing is building an omni-channel presence and delighting consumers. You need to do it consistently to be reliable. So if you do it one time, but you fail the next one, you're actually losing the consumer. So again, from a strategy, I think understanding what you're able really to do and how you can reach your goals, it's very, very, very important because before you even set it, because this also sets the mindset of the people working around and let's say the direction and the expectations for the future.
Okay. I mean, I think that sort of the action plan of getting everybody to come together. But the amount of information that we have, it only and sort of the complexity of different channels, being it the website or the social platform or sort of the store, technology plays a very important role. So companies usually, that's the sort of where they go. I wanted to ask you, in terms of supply chain logistics, warehouse operation, and so on, what are the tips when it comes to preparing for this in terms of the technology platform to connect all of this?
Yeah, and I use an example sometimes when I talk to my colleagues here on technology, which is how do we undo the spaghetti?
Yeah.
Right. Like a lot of the times, what you really see in system architecture is like it's like a spaghetti. Everything goes everywhere. So the way I believe the way forward is how do we simplify? So system architecture and data flow, for me, it's kind of the leading area that we need to look in, and then the system capabilities.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, if we do not have a clean view of our end-to-end data, the handover between the systems, we will never be able to create clarity and transparency. And so for me, it's very, very important to focus on, let's say, creating this simple data flow in the systems. And we can bring one example, which I believe it's very much within the topic of omnichannel, which is inventory, right? At this moment in time, if most companies do not have what I would call the one source of truth for inventory, how can you dynamically serve a market that you might need to fulfill from a store, from a micro fulfillment center, from a local warehouse, or from a regional warehouse? If you have siloed inventory entities that don't talk to each other, and one is updated overnight, the other every 15 minutes, you're disconnected. You cannot serve the marketplace. So to the point is simplify the architecture, create a simple flow of data, and I believe everything else will actually follow, because it will be much easier to plug in the capabilities you need when you know the flow of your processes and of your data.
Yeah, I think simplicity is one key factor when it comes to doing something that's more very, very complicated. It just reminds me of a lot of stories that we find it sort of funny now, how a lot of retailers failed in the initial stages of e-commerce, of fulfilling, simply because they overcomplicated the whole thing, or what you reiterated earlier, how they separated inventory for, this is the inventory for e-commerce, this is inventory for the shop. I think this has been a sort of a very remarkable inside discussion, Alex, and I certainly have enjoyed it here, and I'm sure our audience have. I just wanted to get your final thought, being sort of a guy who's in charge of the supply chain for all the leading retailers in the region. Any sort of thoughts, any takeaways you want to share with the audience?
Yeah. First of all, I think we've talked about it a lot, and I think I'm very passionate about that, is have the consumer at heart.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very important to actually try and include this within everyday decision making when discussing with different stakeholders. Because the reality is that different consumers within the region have different needs. The more we get to know them better, the better solutions and infrastructure we're going to create. So this is our return on investment. It's going to be much higher. So, for me, this is the first key takeaway: consumer first. And we've seen that, if you look at the Amazons of these worlds and the Nikes of these worlds, That's what they do. But they actually do it and they act on it. They don't just preach it in a way. So for me, that's the first key takeaway, consumer at heart. And the second takeaway is take small steps, having the end goal in mind, but don't try to leap, right? Try to experiment and learn. In a company I used to work for, we said, fall forward. Don't be afraid. Don't wait to be perfect in order to implement. Yeah. But using the right infrastructure and using, let's say, the right data to drive your future decisions, experiment. And if you can see the next step, take it as long as you know where you're going. So don't just wait for perfection, because perfection doesn't exist in reality.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I think it's been a very, very rich insight into sort of the omni-channel being it sort of. I liked your sort of this being specific customization for and putting consumer sort of as the forefront and giving them sort of a unified experience on the omni-channel. Thank you very much. I would like to also to thank our listeners, our viewers, and hopefully we stay tuned to our new guests, new topics coming up soon. We look forward to seeing you guys, and thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you very much.